Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are back for episode number 4 of this year's run through the minor league teams in the organization for the Brewers. This episode will be focused on the Biloxi Shuckers. We're going to get into it shortly here, but before we do, Joseph, how you doing? I know the back is something that's bothering you now, and I had that recently. I know that sucks. So, other than that, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Other than that, that's pretty. Man, it's been brutal. Having two puppies, hatching chickens, and having kittens, and all these animal duties on farm with a bad back solo. It's a little much. But you keep plugging away. It's my own farm rehab, I guess, so to speak. But man, there's been a lot going on in Wisconsin sports the last 2 weeks, and I know you and Jack recorded pod just like an hour or so ago about the Freddie Peralta trade. We wish Freddie the best. But yeah, we're going to go back in time a little bit tonight. We're going to talk about the 2025 Biloxi Shuckers, who started 2-7 and then just lit the world on fire for 2 months, and it was amazing. So excited to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack and I did record about an hour and a half ago now, and so this episode you'll probably hear a little bit later. The Peralta trade episode will probably come out immediately the next day after we were done recording. This one might come out early the following week just to break it up a little bit. But yeah, that's the day we're recording is on Thursday following that. So if something changes versus what we talked about here before it comes out, that's kind of the frame of the time frame that we're recording in. But we are going to talk about the Shuckers. Before we get too far into that, though, we did get one question from BR Rosenow on Brewer Fanatic asking, you guys mentioned the lack of minor league signings in an early episode. Is it concerning that they haven't picked up at all? So we did talk about that a couple times even. We, I think, kind of overshot on how many spots were actually going to be available in the upper minors. Joseph looked into it even deeper today, and the current number of stateside players is 147. You're only allowed to have 165. Now, if they're on the 60-day or the full day IL, they don't count towards that total. And there will probably be some that get added to that list before the season even starts. But for the most part, that's where they're at. And it also does not include all of the 40-man players who are currently technically on the major league roster. So they have 39 players on the 40-man right now. That means there's 13 beyond the 26 that will be on the active roster. In a sense, you're basically looking at 160 of the 165 spots being filled. That's before any. In reality, you're probably maybe 5 spots available here. So there's not as much as we thought initially. We will probably see a couple, I would guess, over the next month still. I haven't looked super deep into it. It still feels like the AA team could use a true outfielder of some sort. There's usually pitching that they're going to add a couple guys in terms of arms, but there's not nearly as much as we thought. Joseph, is there anything specifically that you're kind of looking out for here?
No, I agree with you, and perhaps it was Rule 5 whiplash. And a lot. It's just one of those things where at the end of the season, it seemed that we lost so many players to free agency, and then the Rule 5. I think maybe we were living in an imaginative realm there. But however, like to the outfielder point, it's pretty fascinating. If you look at the Shuckers roster as it is today, which is clearly not what it's going to be on opening day, but they have Eduardo Garcia and Luis Lara as the only two listed outfielders. And then they have 9 infielders, including Dylan O'Ray and Jeremy Vargas. So you can see there it's a little bit wishy-washy. As we know, Eric Brown Jr., we know Dylan O'Ray, we know Jeremy Vargas. They've all rotated into the outfield. Heck, Luke Adams, even as we know, when he came into the ACL, was playing in left field, although that's not going to happen. So it's going to change. We'll find out. But I wouldn't be surprised. Like February, they typically, historically, they'll add like, 2 to 3 quadruple A vets. Like last year it was Mashevsky and Manuel Margot we were just talking about. And I think there was even a couple others. Lorenzo was in January. And, off the top of my head, totally unrelated, shout out to Mitch White, who is coming back from the KBO and got a contract with the Giants. I just had to say that because I was thinking about rosters and I was randomly thinking about the Sounds and I saw that today. And way to go, Mitch White. Welcome back.
Yeah, Mitch White, who really had figured some things out towards the end of his Sound stint when he was in the Brewers organization. So good to see him back in professional ball, stateside professional ball. But yeah, this is, I mean, like I said, it's not as many as we thought they were going to be. And that's probably a good thing. I think what we may have discounted more than anything is how many players came off of the IL, like the full season IL at the end of the season too. There were a lot of activations, and a lot of them are now going to be healthy going into this year, and they'll count towards that roster. So I think that probably played a role too. But yeah, it's a good thing because we were actually getting a little worried, like, are they going to be able to fill this with decent players at this point? But now it's not nearly as big a deal as we had originally thought. So, yeah, that can kind of take us into the actual Shuckers talk here. And we'll start, as we always have been, with just a quick overview of the season on the whole. For those of you watching, of course, we've got our graphics up again, but we'll kind of go through it, and then I'll let you kind of recap it a little more overview-wise, Joseph, after I go through kind of just the overall record and how they went month by month and first half versus second half. So to begin, they finished the season overall 74-64. They made it to the playoffs due to their first half playoff berth. They clinched first place in the first half, and that got them into the playoffs. But they were swept 2-0 by Montgomery in the first round this year. But a 42-27 first half is what earned them that record, or in that opportunity to play in the postseason. The second half, much different story, 32-37. There's one main thing that happened literally as they clinched the first half, and that's Brock Wilken getting hurt celebrating that clinching game in the first half. So he ended up missing a good chunk of the second half. You had a Luke Adams missing a good chunk of it. So a lot of these things are tied to some injury. But to go through it more just from a month-by-month standpoint, April, they went 12-11, but Joseph, as you mentioned earlier, they started 2-7, so it was a really strong finish to that month. Then it was a 17-10 May to bring them to 29-21, a 17-8 June, and that's got them to 46-29, and obviously that encapsulated the whole first half as well and went into the second half. July and August is where you saw the struggles happen, and this is a large part of when Brock Wilken and Luke Adams, people who were mainstays in the middle of the lineup, were missing time. And July was a 10-14 record, and then August was 10-17, so that brought them to 66-60 going into September. You actually saw a few of those guys return and some promotions at the end of the season in AA, and they finished strong with an 8-4 record in September for that 74-64 overall record. But Joseph, just kind of looking back on the season as a whole, kind of what were some of the storylines that you saw, and what did you see from just the day-to-day for the Shuckers in 2025?
Yeah, that first half was just awesome. It was truly great. It was like a monkey being lifted off their back from just uninspired play in spurts throughout 2024 and 2025. They backed into the playoffs in 2025. Essentially, they backed in again, but their first half they gave much deserved. So in a different way. But you've heard this. It's a little bit of a broken record throughout the system. The promotions and injuries ended up being the biggest story for the Shuckers, really. I mean, their bullpen got utterly depleted when they lost Tyler Bryant on the heels of seeing their closer get sent up to AAA Nashville, and Justin Yeager, who now is no longer with the Brewers. I wish him well. He was a fun pitcher to watch. But then you lost Chase Costello in the season. They were really piecemealing a staff together there, trying their best, and that led to the Jaron DeBerry promotion. He did great, hit the ground running. But there was a point in time there when Jaron DeBerry was essentially the ace, and he had just been called up because they had so many starters injured as well, and then they had throw Nate Peterson in out of the bullpen where he was finding success, thrust him back into a starting role, and he could never find consistency there throughout his tenure with the Brewers. And so you lose the power brats of Brock Wilken and Luke Adams. That is a massive, massive hole in that lineup. And, speaking of Brock Wilken, I feel like Brock Wilken is a guy who every time since he's been a Brewer, when he's gotten red hot, and he's gotten red hot a couple times, he just suffers the freakish injury. And it's truly unfortunate. So we see that MLB top-rated third baseman rankings come out, and he's number 9. I can't help but wonder what would be for Brock in that type of purview if he had just stayed healthy. Because he certainly wasn't the same player coming back, but he had dislocated his patella or his kneecap. I don't expect him to be hitting the ground running. And it's a miracle, and it's a testament to his work effort and work ethic that he came back when he did. But there was that stretch there in July and August where they were really, really leaning heavy on platoon players, like fringe depth, and several of those players, like Zavi Warren and Garrett Spain, he was kind of full-time after he got brought back down from Nashville, but they were having to do a lot of heavy lifting. Jeremy Vargas, who's, he's a nice depth player, but he's not going to light the world on fire. He was getting a lot of action there. It was a rough spell. And that doesn't even get into, they lost Ramon Rodriguez as well as the first half was coming to a close. And that was a huge loss. But with that loss came a lot of opportunities, and we're going to talk about some of the things we saw in some of those opportunities. So the playoffs 2-0 loss, not really surprising. Montgomery absolutely owns the Shuckers in competitive atmospheres. They're a juggernaut in the Southern League. It wasn't surprising whatsoever. And so, it felt like I was like, oh, here we go again. Another season where the Biscuits eliminate us. And that's just the nature of it. So, but I think as a whole, macro bird's eye view, I think as a Brewers fan and as a Shuckers fan, you had to be thrilled with the season they had overall with the adversity they dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And even part of the storyline for us was, of course, the camera having some issues early in the season, and then we figured that out as we went along, and made it a little easier to watch some of those games at times too. But there are this was a fun Shuckers team comparatively, like, to what we've seen the last few years there, where it's kind of been the spot where talent makes short stops for the most part. The exceptions kind of being Jefferson Cairo and Jackson Churio, who basically spent the whole season there. But a lot of years it's been when the talent gets there, it's not there for super long. So then you haven't gotten the chance to watch, good baseball for an extended stretch. And while the end of the season didn't go great, there was a really, really fun stretch there from the end of April through pretty much the middle of summer. Where they were just warm in terms of top talented players. So it was a fun season to watch, and then it ended on a sour note a little bit, but overall I would say a pretty successful season on the whole. And just, it was a good time. It was a good team, and we're going to talk about a bunch of the players here, because more than last year and more than if we had done it in years prior to, there's a lot of talent that's still going to be in the system that was on the Shuckers this year, and some guys who are legitimately going to be people that you need to watch next year as potential big leaguers at some point. And it's a nice place to be in, because we've talked about a lot of the younger, lower level talent, and a lot of times when the Brewers have had that, they haven't had it in the AA and AAA range. We'll get to the Sounds next time we come around. We won't have as much to talk about there in terms of actual young players who are still in the system, because they've really cycled through that roster. But the Shuckers are a bit of an exception. They did have a lot of talent, and a lot of it is going to be back in the Brewers system next year. And we're going to start with the position side of things. Before we get too deep into that, though, we do have one note we should probably talk about. Eduardo Garcia, who we discussed a bit last time around too, during the Tim Rattler's episode a week ago now, probably. He ended up breaking his forearm. He's a non-roster invitee to spring trainings so he's supposed to be with the big league camp. He's probably going to miss spring and not too much of the season, but there's a pretty good chance it's going to carry over into the regular season. So a guy who is unfortunately probably going to get his first chance at like a true big league camp won't get that opportunity now because of the broken forearm. But the good news is it doesn't sound like it's a super long-term issue. I've got that all correct, right, Joseph?
Yeah, and again, we shouted it out last episode, but shout out to Jim and Daniel who've been running the Winter Leagues thread with A-Plum throughout this entire winter, and that's where we discovered it when Jim Goulart, our long-tenured Hall of Fame minor league reporter and general Brewers aficionado extraordinaire, he posted a link, and it seemed like from what it was described through the translation, it's a pretty minor kind of hairline in terms of fractures go, in that it's one of those where he's not going to need a procedure, and the thinking is it's going to be rest and inactivity for a spell. But I'm imagining, once you're inactive, you're going to have to build up that strength. You're going to have to find that trust again in your body. So yeah. I think your estimation is accurate.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk briefly about Garcia again when we go into these tiers here, but he is somebody who, again, kind of reinvigorated his prospect type to a degree this year with some improvements across the board and got the chance to move up to AA for a little bit more of an extended period than we had seen at any other time. So we'll get to him in a bit, but we are going to start with our MLB caliber tools category. And I'll note right away, we're not going to talk about Jesus Mate again. He did obviously make it there, but it was a very, very short stint. So we're not going to cover him in this one. We could certainly do it, but we'll cover some of these other guys a little bit more in depth this time. So we'll start here with Brock Wilken, who you already mentioned a little bit during the season recap. This is somebody who in 2024 it was a rough season in a lot of ways. It wasn't just performance. He ended up, technically his performance was about league average, but on the whole, it was a little disappointing coming off of a first rounder who had been quickly pushed to AA, and you're expecting to see a bunch of good things. And it was a little bit of a struggle, but in context, he was dealing with getting hit in the face with a fastball, which had messed up his eye to a degree that it was actually causing vision issues for him in the box. He had also had his first child. He was dealing with a lot of things outside of baseball that were going on. And then he came into 2025, and his April was off to a little bit of a slow start again. It wasn't anything not blowing you away. And then he just caught fire, and he was hitting home runs what felt like every single day. I was having a lot of fun just posting, Brock Wilken hit another homer on Twitter like every day for a stretch there. He was just crushing the ball, and it was really nice to see. He pretty much was carrying that all the way into that unfortunate injury, but more than anything, just seeing him, I mean, he had 18 home runs and he only ended up with 344 plate appearances. So it really, really solid. Like that's big time power production. The strikeout rate was still a bit higher than you'd like to see it, but it was down to 27%, which is more within the range of, yes, that's acceptable if you're hitting for legitimate power. The whiff rate got under 30% this year comparatively to what he had shown the years prior. The walk rate is the interesting one, and I think the one that'll be most interesting for me to follow with him on the sounds. It was 20.1%. I would not buy that that's sustainable at all as you get into AAA and then the big leagues. But it does show a very good ability to take the correct pitches. You could probably argue, and we'll talk about it with another guy in this category, that he was more passive than patient at times, where it's almost just not enough swinging. And that's leading to walks against worse competition. But once they get in the zone more often at the best, highest levels, it may come back to bite him a little bit. But overall, we're talking about a 159 WRC plus, and that's pulled down a decent amount by what happened in the couple weeks after he returned at the end of the year, coming off of the major knee injury, where he wasn't quite the same. You could just kind of see he maybe wasn't even ready to come back when they had brought him back at that point. Physically he was, but just in terms of being ready to play in games, he had gotten some bridge league work, but it just didn't look like he had rhythm at the plate or anything. But even then, even with all that, It was a 876 OPS and a 159 WRC plus in a crazy pitcher friendly environment. So it was a really, really good season from him offensively. Defensively, I think he keeps getting better at third base. I think it's a position where I definitely think it's something he can handle enough to play it at the big league level. I don't know he's guaranteed to stay there because the Brewers obviously have a premium on defense on the infield, and maybe he won't quite live up to what they're asking out of a defensive infielder. But I think he's got a pretty good chance. I really like what I've seen from him there. So, Joseph, when you were watching him and just throughout the season and obviously factoring in the injury and the environment and everything, a really, really nice bounce back year from him, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan of Brock Wilken. And, once you got more perspective of what was really going on in 2024, you kind of just threw that one out the window. And then, first half Brock Wilken, I don't think necessarily we're going to see first half Brock Wilken all the time. But if that can show up semi-regularly, given with what you're saying, and I've said this since he became a Brewer, his defense, much like Andrew Fisher, vastly underrated. Like, he's got a good arm. It's accurate. He's got, within his range, he has good actions to both sides. His glove's pretty good. Occasionally a ball will go under it. But all in all, he's just a really nice third base prospect. And however he ends up being used by the Brewers, whether it's as a third baseman that moves up and ultimately makes a roster or ends up being traded, I think you look at the draft pick as it originally was, and you just see that was a value pick. It was a very good pick, and he's a very good player, and he has a lot of tools. And I just really hope he can stay healthy. That's all it comes down to.
Yeah. No, that's what we're hoping for, and seems like a definite candidate to start the year in AAA next year, given what he did do in AA and the fact that it was year 2 in AA as well. I think he's pretty much a shoo-in for AAA. Maybe after a short stint in AA to start the year, but I'd imagine we'll see him in AAA to begin the year. Blake Burke, we talked about last episode a bit because he spent a good chunk of his season in Appleton, but we kind of hinted at the fact that it was a tale of 2 seasons between the 2 affiliates that he was playing at. Very hit friendly, high average. He kept the strikeouts in check. He did a good job with all of that in high A. But when he made the transition to AA, the power showed up in a big time way for Blake Burke. I think he quadrupled almost his home run total in his time with AA compared to where it had begun after he got the promotion. There was a huge change in the batted ball profile as well. It went from over 50% grounders to around 40%, and he basically turned all of those grounders into fly balls. And for a guy who just hits the ball line in the air, if you get it in the air, things are going to go well for you. And he was getting it in the air very consistently. It was, for me, and we talked about the defense and everything last time, we won't rehash all of it, but the power is what makes or breaks Blake Burke's MLB future for me. I don't expect an insane run of power like we saw in his stretch in Biloxi, but he's a guy who can hit 30-plus homers. He's capable of it. Can he lift the ball like he did in Biloxi moving forward? That's the question for me. And if he does, then I think he's more or less a surefire MLB hitter in my eyes. It might be a DH. I think he can. I'm confident he can play first, but if he lifts the ball as much as he did in AA, things are going to go very well for Blake Burke. What did you see from him after the promotion?
Yeah, I mean, it's mildly hilarious in that, you move from high A to what is considered a very difficult league to hit in. And apparently all he needed to do was go back to Knoxville. That was the real breakout there, that multi-home run series. And I can remember it like it was yesterday, the Knoxville announcers saying, we just haven't seen a lot of home runs hit in this ballpark. It's a new park for the Smokies, and here we are. And game 1, he absolutely torches a nuke Oppo center left. That was like, okay, here we go. And it just kept going. And so it was it was absolutely thrilling. And honestly, it was a little bit validating, because it was like, I felt like there were a lot of naysayers on Blake Burke. And I felt like in the forums and whatnot, I kept saying he's a good player. Yeah, he's hitting grounders, but it's in there. It's absolutely in there. And it was an awesome, awesome run. And yeah, to your point, if he can come back and show some semblance of that to start 2026, look out, because I totally agree with you. That is a dead surefire, dead set DH first base major league player. There's no doubt about it. Because even when, you can just see, okay, so he was going through a spell where he was hitting a bunch of ground balls, but you can see his swing is pure and he knows what he's looking for and he identifies pitches, and he's just a really good baseball player. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing how he comes out. And with the Brock Wilken message that you gave before, if he starts out a little slow, nobody needs to panic. Let's wait a month or so and see how the chips fall.
Yes. Yeah. And just to illustrate the homer difference, he had 408 plate appearances in high A. He had 5 home runs, and then he had 159 in double A, and he had 11 home runs. So it was quite the difference. He over doubled the home run total in less than half of the plate appearances. Yeah, it was a really big difference, and it was all you really needed to see left from him. Like everything else you saw in high A was really good. You wanted to see the power show up, and it showed up in a huge way after the promotion. So that was great to see. Moving to the next name, and this is the one that for most is probably going to be the highest ranked in prospect rankings among all the guys we're going to talk about here, and that's Cooper Pratt. He had an interesting season, I would say. In the end, we're talking about a guy who was spending almost the entire season as a 20-year-old in Double A. He turned 21 at the tail end of the season, but overall posted a 108 WRC plus. Again, this is the Southern League, and we got a question about that, and I'll get to that when we're done talking about some of the hitters on the Southern League hitting environment and kind of what it means a little bit more. But Cooper Pratt, it was a 691 OPS, but that still put him at a 108 WRC plus. He was an above average hitter for the Southern League. That tells enough of the story probably for some people already, but that's how difficult of a hitting environment it was in the Southern League this year. But I think the main thing that we saw from him offensively is a really, really good ability to get the bat to the ball. His whiff rate was in a very good spot, only 22%. His strikeout rate was even better. It was 15.2%. He also walked at almost a 13% clip. The plate discipline and the batted ball stuff, or bat to ball stuff, was good. The batted ball stuff is where it gets interesting with him, and this is the thing that he's going to definitely have to improve upon to really reach the ceiling that he has within him. This is a bigger guy. Like, this is a 6 foot, he's 6'4", 6'4", 195. And the power numbers it was 8 home runs. He basically had like 2 stretches where he got kind of power hot and he hit a few homers like in a week. And then most of the rest of the season, you weren't really seeing that over the fence power. His 90th percentile exit velocity, Baseball America put out the list of their top 100 players, and they put out their 90th percentile exit velocities for all of them. His was the 3rd lowest of all of them. And just based on the physicality that he has, like that's something that feels like it can change. But his current swing and his current approach is definitely tailored more to hit tool. I think the only concern with that for me is that he's not a burner. He's a very good base runner, but he's not a burner. So it's not like he's going to add many infield hits. I think he will leg some out. He has long strides. He makes it work, but he's more in like the average to above average speed, but with fantastic base running instincts that actually allows him to steal bases at a pretty good clip. But he also was, the line drive rate was solid, 22.6%, which was like 58th percentile for minor leaguers, which is fine. But if you're going to be a hit tool guy, you probably want it to be higher than that. The ground ball rate wasn't in a terrible spot. The interesting thing is the fly ball rate isn't bad, but he's not hitting the ball hard enough to get to the power. So if he can add some bat speed, if he can add a little bit of that juice to the bat, then I think the ceiling is very, very high for Cooper Pratt, and there is a lot to dream on. My concern is if that power doesn't come, the glove will be there. He's going to be a very good defensive shortstop. He's got a good arm. No concerns there. But does he fall into that Nick Ahmed range or not? I don't think he'll ever be like Jordy Mercer level offensively, but like that type of range where it's based more on the glove and not much on the bat. And if he is, does he end up being a guy who's an everyday player for the Brewers? My guess would be not. So the power is still the thing for me that I'll be watching, but just overall, Joseph, and you can talk about the power as well, but what did you see from him? And I do want to, before I even get into all of that, I do want to clarify, he was 20 most of the year. There's a lot of room for growth, but it is something that you definitely, I think, need to keep an eye on because it's the thing that could hold him back.
Yeah, that was actually chatted up a little bit in the minor league forum on the last couple of days, and I think there were some really good points in there. And one of them that really, and it was the poster who goes by Swaim, shout out Dale Swaim, who always adds really great numbers and kind of evidentiary kind of back up to his greater points that tend to be very moderate and eloquent, quite frankly. And anyhow, he brought up something that I thought about previously, but I'd kind of gone away from, but I think it's a really good analogy that Cooper Pratt, currently as he is as a player, it reminds us of Bryce Terang. And I think that's a pretty good analogy. And I would also say, I think Cooper Pratt has more power than Bryce Terang does, even though Bryce is just finding his power. But I think in terms of the path we might see moving forward, he might be a guy who gets to the major leagues and then has to get sent down again to tweak some things to really, to your point, really work on elevating the ball and finding that proper plane and finding more of that line drive power. Because you see it, he can pull the ball over the fence. Like when he does it, it's very obvious, but he doesn't access that often. And that to me is, he's 20 years old, elite defense. Well, and we have dogs. I don't know what that's all about. And so, yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. I did forget to I skipped past a couple questions on some of these guys. So I'm going to hit up a few of the questions we got on some of them. We'll start with J78 Shot, who asked us about we'll come back to that. I'll talk about that at the end. This is about the Southern League. Do Wizard asked about our thoughts on Wilkins, so I think we covered that. Ostentatious asked about Cooper Pratt, so this is probably a good one for us to talk about here because it's a pretty good question. He asks if he is using the whole field offensively. He says, I feel like every highlight I see, he's pulling it. Is that how he can get his hit tool better, i.e. by using all fields? So just to give a little more specific numbers on that. So Cooper Pratt's pull rate is for minor league baseball last year, really out of the ordinary about it. His center rate is 24.5%, which is in the 15th percentile. And then his oppo rate is 30.4%, which is also in the 50th percentile. So I think Cooper Pratt spreads the ball to all fields pretty well. I think when you see highlights and you say they're all to the pull side, I think that's because right now that pure power isn't there. And because of that, when he's hitting extra base hits, they're usually going to be the pull side. Like that's where you're going to see the homers. That's where you're going to see a lot of the doubles is in the left center or down the left field line, because that's just, for most players, the majority of players, that's where you get your power more than anywhere else. And because he's lacking in the power department right now, I think most of what you see on highlights is going to be to that pull side. I don't think he has an issue going to the opposite field. In fact, like I said, it's not the same percentage, but in terms of where it lines up with the rest of minor league baseball, it's basically they're both 50th percentile. So I don't think it's something that is like an issue for him going to all fields. I think it's more just, you could argue that maybe hitting the ball with some authority to all fields would be the next step for him. That might be where you could see some growth, but I think the overall hit tool, it's probably more about the angles in terms of like launch angles than it is about the horizontal spreading it out around the field angles. If I were guessing, but Joseph, just along those lines, he was asking about I don't know if you heard the question, but he was asking about, spreading the ball around a little bit more for Cooper Pratt. Is that something that would help the hit tool?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm just laughing inside. I try my best to record these episodes without any canine disruption. I have no idea what that was all about. Okay, that's enough. Thank you. Goodness gracious. Yeah, so I'd like to see him. And I think your greater point about the reason why we're not seeing that is that he hasn't accessed that true power yet. And so, once he does that, everything opens up. We've seen him hit Oppo. It's not like he hasn't hit an Oppo home run. Yeah. He has. But you just don't see it as much. But, when you're not hitting the ball as hard as you'd like, maybe you have a little pressure because you're back home in Mississippi. You're 20, you're playing up levels, you're in a hitter-unfriendly league. Maybe he has pressure on himself. I just think it's a process. He'll get there. But as of right now, there's genuine concerns, and they're real. And I don't think it's overstating anything. But this is a big season. We say that about a lot of guys, but this is a big season for him because he's going to start back in Double-A. He's going to have to see how his off-season work helped him. And hopefully he can start accessing that more purely. It's there. It's just not consistent.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. The other question we got on a player that we already went past is Blake Burke from Ostentatious asking, I don't get why MLB has him 29th in our system. What are they seeing? All I see is a productive hitter. So I think a big part of that is that MLB Pipeline has not re-ranked in quite a while. My guess is that will not be the case the next time they do a re-ranking. But part of it was that the power wasn't there early. He's a first base only prospect. He's got a chance to be a DH more than first base. I don't think that'll be the case, but that's why they pushed him down as far as they did early in the season. Like I said, I don't believe they've updated since even the All-Star break, the actual team lists, if I'm remembering right. Maybe they did an end of season 1, but I think they haven't done it since the middle of the season. So I would guess that's playing a big role. I don't think it's going to hold true the next time we see an MLB Pipeline update, if I were to guess. So I think that probably covers that one, unless you have anything different, Joseph. Otherwise, we can move to Luke Adams here.
You can go ahead to Luke.
Okay.
The only thing I would just say real quickly is
I'll even start.
I would just remind listeners that, we often get caught up in the rankings and where players are placed. And at the end of the day, it doesn't mean all that much. And if you feel a certain way about a player and he's probably a top 20 prospect, then feel good about that. It doesn't matter. Pipeline is often conservative on some of those things, and they don't update them regularly. And so take it with a grain of salt.
Yep. Very good point. It's one of those things, especially if you're following it closely. Like you said, if you see stuff, like, you should believe in what you're seeing and what you're seeing in the numbers and what you're seeing on tape and go with it yourself. Like, there are times where I have very, very different rankings from what are on some of the public lists, and sometimes they line up really well. But I think if you have your own opinions, that's great. I think that's a really good thing. And I think the main thing to remember is they're updating like twice a year. So things can become outdated really, really quickly. But yeah, I think that's a good reminder for everybody that we'll talk about here. But Ostentatious asked about Luke Adams as well. And he said, I find Luke Adams to be one of the oddest profiles I've ever seen. You see him get off the bus and he looks like Paul Bunyan, yet he's got surprising speed. His reputation is that he lays off a lot of pitches. As he goes up levels, pitchers have better command. Passive swing decisions concern me. What's your feeling on how he needs to develop? So I think you nailed it there. I think making a transition from passive to patient is, I think, what would unlock Luke Adams completely at the plate. The power is there. I think if an even more aggressive approach actually might help him get to the power more often. I have a feeling a lot of his hardest hit balls are kind of hit into the ground because there's a bit of hesitancy on whether to let it fly or not at times. If you have a little bit more trust in what you're seeing and go after it, and it might cut down, the walk rate has been absurd for him pretty much his whole career. The good news is, even if the walk rate goes down, the dude gets hit by pitches at a level that we've basically never seen. He's trying to set every team record that's ever existed for the Brewers minor league system and hit by pitches every year, I think. But he his walk rate this year was 16.5%. I actually thought that was in a much better place than what we've seen in the past. I think it's more realistic to see it in the teens rather than the 20s. The strikeout rate was only 20.3%. The whiff rate, 23.5%. All great things. He's hitting balls over 110 miles per hour. The raw power is absolutely there. And honestly, the ground ball rate's in a pretty good spot. The line drive rate is in a really good spot. The only thing he runs into a lot is when he does elevate the ball, a lot of them are not even fly balls. There's a lot of infield pop-up in his game. So he's kind of mishitting these balls a little bit more than you'd want to see from somebody who it seems like there's maybe been an actual attempt to get the ball in the air more often. And it's kind of been a trend the last couple of years for him where like a lot of the stuff looks really good, but there's a lot of infield pop-ups. And those are, to me, that's basically a strikeout because it works almost the exact same. Like that's a free out. They're not missing that. It's pretty much the equivalent because the very rare occasion that a pop-up drops is kind of the same as, a drop third strike and you get on base. Like it's pretty much on par. So those are that to me, that's the one thing I want to see him clean up in terms of the batted ball profile. But I do think he needs to find a little bit more aggression in his approach. And if that makes the strikeout rate go from 20% to 23% and the walk rate to drop from 16 to 12, but it gets him to impact the ball more often and to really be able to tap into that raw power, that is a trade-off I think he can afford to make. Not everyone can afford to make it, but where he is currently with everything else he has going on, I think that's something he can afford to do. And then defensively, I still would like to see him get some opportunities at third base, but it's getting more difficult with just how many people are cycling through that position in the Brewers system. So it looks like first base is probably what we're going to be looking at for Adams, where I think he'll be quite solid over there defensively, and a very good athlete for the spot too. But Joseph, what do you see from Adams? Approach wise, is that kind of where you think he should maybe go next, or is there anything else you've noticed that you think maybe he could change up to try and get a little bit better and maybe reach his full potential?
Yeah, I'm really glad. There was a time when he was playing for Carolina when I was actually pleading to get him to first base more because his athleticism is just such an advantage there. Unlike it typically is. Like he's just truly a premium athlete, and he's a little awkward at third base. He takes some really weird one-hop kangaroo throws. So I get there. There's other guys they want to cycle through there. They have a lot of utility infielders that could do that. I think, one of the things that's been interesting for me in this offseason in particular, I've kind of had a thought exercise on, is that I feel like in a way there was something going on within the Brewers org where they recognized they had two supremely talented misfit toys. One was Jader Arianamo, and the other was Luke Adams. And I think, there's this thing where they're like, well, I don't know if we can have two of these things going on. We got one guy that gets hit all the time. He's got immense power, but he hits pop-ups, and he's like a unicorn in athleticism. The other guy, I don't know if he really identifies the strike zone. He takes tomahawk hacks, but man, he's an unbelievable defender, and he's accessing his power. We got to get rid of one of these guys. Of course, that's not how it happened, but he's just like it's important to remember he was drafted out of high school, so he's still very much a raw ball of clay, and we've seen great strides in a very short period of time. And I still feel like with Luke Adams, there's just this immense untapped, unknown upside, and I don't even know what that is. But if we're going to talk about Cooper Pratt finding more of his true power, well, we can also kind of wax poetic and imagine a future where Luke Adams has found how to not hit all these pop-ups. He's found how to be a little more aggressive and not be so passive at the dish. And inevitably, he might even get hit twice as much, which would be unbelievable. But yeah, I think there's just a real intriguing development path here that could happen. And also just a truly unique player, unlike any other in the system. And to the questioner's point, yeah, he's not like a profile you've ever seen because he literally is one of one. And he's one of the most fun guys to watch in that he's an electrically passionate person on the diamond. He's a guy who, in an interview last year with the Timber Rattlers, mentioned he doesn't drink coffee because he's already amped up. And that's very obvious when you watch him celebrate a home run. Like, the guy is jacked. He's yoked. He's super stoked. An amazing teammate. You can see he's just got a great attitude and a great outlook. So, yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting because I agree that those pop-up issues, that's a big deal. Like, he has to nip that in the bud. Like, to me, that's even more worrisome than the walks and those other things. Like, that's just something like where I don't know if it's a part of the patience game or if, he's got to refine some things because he has an unorthodox swing. But man, when he hits those balls, those are absolute cannon shots. Absolute cannon shots. So yeah, this will be another one, another premium prospect. Will just be fascinating to see how an offseason went for him.
Yeah, for sure. And just to touch on the energy and everything, I may have even told the story when we talked about him last year on the T-Rats pod, but I went to a game in Appleton while he was on the team in 2024, and it was pouring rain. So I just moved up and sat like right behind the plate from where my actual seats were because hardly anyone was in the stands. And I had a pretty good view of the T-Rats dugout, and Adams was hurt at the time. He wasn't playing. I don't think he was even active. Maybe he was active, but he wasn't going to play in the game. Everyone on the team is kind of sitting, on the bench under the dugout because it's pouring rain while the game's going on. And Luke Adams is by himself on the top rail, smacking the railing, screaming. You can hear him just getting fired up the whole game. Like, it was one of those things that, like, is that really the difference between somebody being a big leaguer and not? No. But does it matter? Yeah. Like, that's something that absolutely matters. And that's going to endear you to teammates and everyone that you come across. And, like, you can see it. Like, the guy just loves playing baseball. And that's something that obviously the Brewers organization puts a lot of value in. There's a lot of players like that. But even in an organization that puts that much of an emphasis on it, he stands out above pretty much everyone else for the way that he plays and the energy that he brings. So he's just always going to be a personal favorite just to watch because he is there for the right reasons. You can tell everything he's doing is for the right reasons. He wants to win. He wants to have fun. He wants to compete. He's just a guy that's very easy to root for, and I really hope that he puts it together because he's a guy that I think the fans in Milwaukee would absolutely fall in love with if he's on a big league roster. So that's the last thing we can talk about there, but we do need to touch on Luis Lara because I think of all the stories in the minor league system for the Brewers this year, the one that maybe got overlooked the most, that was the most exciting for me, was Lara. I think he took a huge step this year. He was in Double-A. He spent the entire season as a 20-year-old. He turned 21 in November. He won a Gold Glove as the best defensive center fielder in minor league baseball, and it was deserved. Watching him, Blake Perkins is a better defender. Garrett Mitchell's a better current defender. I think you could argue he's as good as Sal Frelick already defensively, and Sal Frelick has a major league Gold Glove to his name already. So, like, this is a legit plus glove in center field. He can get to everything, and he plays a bit like Frelick in the way that he will run through a wall, he'll dive, he'll lay out. He is not afraid to get dirty and to get beat up a little bit to make a play, and that was really fun to see, but he's always showed signs of that. I think he really came along this year in terms of, like, really putting all the defense together in terms of his jumps, his reads, his routes, but he always had the athleticism and the want to. But the thing that was most exciting was seeing him step from high A to Double-A in a really tough hitters environment and have a really solid offensive season, a 117 WRC plus. He got his line drive rate back up to where I was hoping to see it because it had dropped a decent amount in high A. His whiff rate was an unbelievable 17.3%. His strikeout rate was only 16.2%. And one big difference that we saw from him this year is that he drew a lot more walks. That has been something that he was known as a bit of a free swinger at times. early in his minor league days. You talked about Arianamo. My guess is the Brewers had a very similar conversation with Lara about this being a really, really important thing that we need to see you improve upon. And he took to it this year. It was really, really good to see the walks creep up. I talked about how the defensive instincts looked a lot better. I think the base running instincts looked way better as well. He's always stolen a bunch of bases, but this year he was 44 of 51, which is an 86% clip for somebody who in the past had kind of been in like that upper low 70s usually in terms of success rate to steal bases. That's a really big deal. Like if you can steal at that level and steal that many bases, that is a really, really high clip at a really solid percentage. And you will get to steal a lot of bases in the big leagues if you can do that. So just everything across the board for me was big time improvement. Even the power, it doesn't show in the numbers, but it does show in the actual batted ball data that I've seen from him. So I talked about Cooper Pratt's 90th percentile exit velocity. Luis Lara, who probably generously is listed at 5'8". I would guess he is not 5'8". I think he's shorter than that. He actually had a higher 90th percentile exit velocity than Cooper Pratt this year. So I think there's actually going to be some in-game power down the line, and it didn't show a ton in games in terms of the home run numbers, but he was hitting the ball hard this year, and he was starting to elevate it a little bit more. He went from a guy who was kind of starting to fall down lists into like the mid-20s to pretty much a consensus top 10 guy for almost every major list that has come out this offseason in the system. And it's because there's just so much to like. And I made a comp on the main podcast with Jack at one point where it was like, the floor is pretty close to Blake Perkins. Like at this point, you're going to get insanely good defense. The bat is going to be a switch hitter who gets you on base a decent amount, can steal you some bases. And if there's pop or if the bat comes around a little bit more, you could even be like a switch hitting Sal Frelick. Like either of those are great outcomes that help a baseball team. So seeing him make that jump as a 20-year-old in AA, that was for me one of my favorite, like underappreciated storylines from the season. Just watching him and having watched him a lot in Appleton, obviously too. What did you maybe see that changed for him this year?
Well, I think that now is as good a time as any to shout out Kevin Martier, who was the newly arrived last year hitting coach from the Yankees organization. My goodness, you had we're literally talking like one breakout after the next. You know, obviously there's some outliers there, but man, I don't know what he was doing. I don't know how he was doing it, but man, he was doing something and it was working. Yeah, Lara is one of those, it's almost comical to your point about his height in that that manager Pat Murphy absolutely loves him already. And this was before the season he had in AA. And it just further shows, man, it's the small guys. He loves the small guys. But man, they're so talented. And Lara, oh, what a fun watch. He's just absolutely electric in the outfield. There's really nothing more you can say. I know that Javik and the Shuckers media team, they put out like a 2.5-minute clip of his highlights from the season after he won the Gold Glove. And it was like one web gem after the next. And that's what it's like when you watch him. He could hit all the alleys, covers so much ground. He sacrifices his body, not afraid to dive headfirst into the wall over his head. It's absurd. But yeah, I don't think any of the corollaries or, the floor comments there are off. Like he already is the floor of Blake Perkins. I think that's absolutely accurate. It doesn't have Perkins' size, so he can't scale the wall, but he also has a good vertical. I would be very curious to know what his vertical is because he can jump. But yeah, this year, more than anything, I felt like this year, and to your point about the power, there were several games I watched from the Shuckers where he just missed a home run at the warning track, like by feet. And so it was absolutely showing. Some of them just didn't leave the park. But I feel like he showed more of the complete player this year. And the fact that he could be a true leadoff, or he could go in the bottom of the lineup and still be a danger. He could go, he could hit second because of his speed and his ability to beat out grounders, but he's hitting balls hard anyway. I just feel like everything opened up. Whereas we were kind of last year, or the year before, I should say, it's 2026, excuse me, 2024, I think we were left a little bit like, oh, is he going to make enough contact? Is he always going to just be a defensive guy? But you'd see moments, but you didn't really see a full, and then to see a full season of horizon and possibility, it changed everything. Absolutely changed everything. So if he can pick up where he left off, he's going to be a fast riser. He's going to surprise people. He's going to be in AAA sooner than you know it. And he's going to carve out a starting role in AAA. And then that starts getting into this very interesting conversation. But this depth of the greater organization and in the greater gestalt of the Brewers minors, it's absolutely everything they need, because we saw what just happened with Freddie. But they keep it retooled and reloaded because they have a guy like Luis Lara who fell out of the top 20, but here he comes back and he reminds everybody he's actually a top 10 player who's got an immense amount of tools. And if we're seeing that hitting profile now at age 20, what kind of power does he actually have? Is this a guy that's going to be like, could he turn into some version of Durbin Jet Williams-ish where he's hitting 10, 15 a year? That's a pretty valuable player, extremely valuable player. So, yeah, he's one of my hands down one of my most favorite players in the entire system, regardless of ranking, just from pure entertainment and pure what he brings to the diamond.
Yeah, and like I said that at the beginning, like this is part of, we're talking about how fun a lot of these guys are. That's why it was a lot more fun to watch the Shuckers this year, because they had a lot of talented dudes who were also very, very engaged and very just always bringing the energy and always playing hard. And it's very fun to watch teams like that. And it's part of what the Brewers' identity is. So guys kind of know in the minors, like they got to bring that type of energy or you might not ever be able to make it on the Brewers roster. So I think that kind of trickles down from them. But that kind of wraps up our MLB caliber tools part of this tier list. We're going to move into the second tier, which was MLB caliber tools with some more questions than the others. And everyone that was in the original tier, we went through, like they all have questions right now, but I would say these are more questions, but there are things that point to a potential big league. There's future potential to be big leaguers, but with more questions here. So I'm going to let you, Joseph, because I know this was one of your favorite storylines to watch, Matthew Wood, when he got the call up from high A to double A. I want to let you kind of take the floor on this one, but I will ask the questions we got first. So Cheesehead and QC asked, I guess for Biloxi, was there some noticeable improvement from Matt Wood behind the or beyond the surface level stats? I think the fact he was never really impressive when the T-Rats came to town has me a bit more skeptical of his Biloxi numbers than I otherwise would be. And Do Wizard said, it seems like Wood figured something out in double A. Do you think he can keep it up? So what did you see from Wood, especially after that promotion to double A?
Yeah, the first thing I noticed above and beyond anything else is the improved defense. Night and day difference. He was catching the ball purer, his movements were more fluid, and he was throwing base runners out, something he wasn't really doing in Carolina or in Wisconsin. And this gets to, to Lara's point about the stolen base success. Something was brewing in Biloxi in terms of up-leveling, because these guys are in a harder environment. You have more experienced pitchers. You have better talent across the board. Guys were dialing in. Matthew Wood literally, and it was a call-up that was mandated because of Ramon Rodriguez's injury. You want to talk about getting an opportunity and taking advantage of it? Matthew Wood absolutely put himself onto the prospect radar for the Brewers. Absolutely. I think that if you see that version of Matthew Wood in 2026, we are talking about a legitimate backup major league catcher, like without pause. It's that solid. Like everything was just more confident. Everything was more sure. And it was just all of those, if you remember in our previous podcasts, my gripe with Matt was that he would drop a lot of catchable balls behind the plate. Balls that I felt like hit his mitt and he should have made a play on them, caught them clean, and it would have cleaned things up and it would have changed the dynamic. He didn't really have that issue at all. And he was in a pretty heavy rotation. And the hitting part, I haven't even got to that. The hitting part, he was getting the balls in the air. He was just finding more success. I've always liked Matt Wood's swing. And I think, again, back to Kevin Martir, I don't know what they were working on explicitly, but he was getting better carry in a humid, dank, southern environment, and it just felt like everything in the hit department kind of just came together. I think it's fair to question whether that's going to last. I don't know, but we'll have an opportunity to see that. If that hit tool is also here in the manner it was in 2026, it just further solidifies how I felt leaving that season. And Matt Wood was kind of an afterthought for me, but I watched the majority of the Shucker season, and he was consistently night in and night out when he was given his opportunities. He was good. Like he was a key part of that, second half. They absolutely needed him because they were losing guys left and right. And he was a core part of a player who you could pretty much count on to hit like 255, 260, a little bit of power, knock runners over, give you good at-bats, and then give you plus defense, throw out over 25% of the runners. It was crazy. There was a point in time there early in his tenure where he was like throwing out like 35% of base runners. It was nuts. So, yeah, I think the question's fair, yet to be determined, but I think we should be excited about what we saw because it felt like a lot of things that we thought might be there kind of showed up.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a guy I was pretty hard on, I think, last year when we talked about it, or at least I was pretty hard on him in my own rankings and the way I was viewing him coming into the season. And he didn't do anything special in high A prior to the promotion. So it was kind of like, I still don't really see it with him. And there something clicked when he got to Double A. There were legitimate changes. Like you said, I thought the receiving was more focused and better. The blocking was better. The throwing was better at the plate. The approach was really good. Like you mentioned, I mean, there was some power, but he also only whiffed 17.7% of the time. Strikeout rate of only 14%. Walk rate was also 14%. It was a 124 WRC plus on the season overall, and that's spending most of the time in the Southern League. Like it was a really good season from Wood, and I think the question more than anything for him in this category is, let's see you do it over a longer period of time now. Like it was a decent period of time, but we just need to see him do it again, I think, to start this year, and then there probably becomes a lot more like, okay, there's something real to this, and this may have been a true breakout because everything we saw looked good. Now it's just a matter of doing it for an extended period and really seeing how it can look. And we're going to talk about the next two guys pretty quickly here because a lot of it is tied into injury with both of them. Mike Bovee and Eric Brown Jr. Now, Eric Brown Jr. is in a different tier of injury issues than Mike Bovee is. Bovee played quite a bit this season, but never quite looked the same coming off of his shoulder injury and surgery that he had in the offseason. It just looked a little off to me the majority of the time. He couldn't really play the field most of the season. Well, for me, he's in a wait and see. Let's see how he looks in 2026 and go from there. I know we did get one question on him that we can take quick from Matt K. He asked, has Mike Bovee's hitting ability been maxed out now? 50 slug. I thought he had some Wade Bogsian potential, but now I'm concerned he will struggle to get higher than Double A, or is it only injuries that have stopped him? There are other factors that have played into it too. He never really was getting to the power even prior to the injury that you were hoping to see from him. He had kind of gotten forced into first base only profile for the most part, even prior to the injury. But especially coming off the injury, it certainly looks like first base is where he's going to end up defensively. But to me, it's still very much, let's see how it looks in 2026. I still like the swing. I still think he's got a very good approach within him. And I'd like to see how he looks further removed from the injury. Is there anything specifically that kind of has you worried beyond the injuries that you saw, or anything that gives you some hope going into the next season either?
Yeah, it's hard to know how a rotator cuff is going to impact a player until you see it. And it was very obvious he wasn't fully himself. I mean, the strikeout rate more than anything was shocking to me. Like, he's not a guy historically who strikes out a lot. He had games where he was like over 5 with 4 strikeouts, if I remember correctly. It was just very odd. The lack of positional versatility is always going to hinder him because he's not a great defender. He's a smaller guy, and he has to have his hit tool front and center. And so if his hit tool is not right, well, he becomes kind of a poor man's Zavi Warren in that respect with less utility. Yep. It's kind of strange. So this is a huge season for him in that regard, where he has to rediscover that hit tool, because when he's hitting right, he's a guy you can have in the lineup every day because he's a meaningful DH. But when he's not hitting well and he's not playing any defense, then he's just a player that is a spot player. And he's a kind of roster fodder at that point, sadly to say. But I think that shoulder really it's a big deal. And so, it was a late injury, late last offseason, I believe, even, or at the end of the season. I can't remember correctly. And it was just mysterious. And then we just saw a version of Mike Bovee we hadn't ever seen before. So I tend to throw that out and then just say, okay, let's see what we have in 2026.
Yep, I would agree. But this is going to be a huge season for him. It'll be the Rule 5 eligibility season. Not that really, unless he has a good season, it's probably not something you have to worry about much. But it's just the organizational clock is ticking on him a little bit. And given where he was drafted, it's, you got to start seeing some bigger results at the higher levels. Eric Brown Jr. absolutely fits that mold as well. Somebody that, going back to that draft, was my guy. I wanted them to take him, and it has just not quite worked out how I expected it to, and obviously how the Brewers and Eric Brown Jr. expected it to. He has truly just been unable to be on the field with any sort of consistency, and I still think there's plenty of talent in there, and there's a lot of things that he's cleaned up in his swing and the mechanics of it. But I also worry to an extent he may have lost some of the athleticism in his swing in the process. So there are things that it's definitely at that point where no matter what, if he's hurt, if he's healthy, if it doesn't work out in 26, it's probably time to pretty much pull the plug on that in terms of much hope of him being a big leaguer, at least for the Brewers. There's always a chance he rediscovers it after a year or two with another organization or whatever, but I think the Brewers are probably viewing it as pretty much a make or break year for Eric Brown Jr. going into 2026. The only thing I will say is that I do think there's a world where he can be an Andrew Monasterio type, where he can be that utility guy who plays a bunch of spots in the infield. He's even played outfield, as you mentioned earlier. He's a really, really good athlete. But yeah, it's definitely running low on the clock for Eric Brown Jr. But that can lead us into Eduardo Garcia, who I would have said the same thing on last year, and now he's kind of gotten a new lease on life as a prospect. And in terms of somebody that the team, I think, views a little bit more highly, they brought him back on another minor league deal because they'd like to keep him in the system. We mentioned the injury that he's dealing with currently, but he had a mostly healthy season last year. His best performances came in high A. He did struggle at times in double A, but he showed some of the tools that you would like to see as well at other times. And it wasn't a huge sample, so we don't need to talk too much about either of them. But do you have anything you'd like to add on Eric Brown Jr. or Garcia?
Not much. Eric Brown Jr. is kind of to date, it's just been a really sad kind of experience for him. I can imagine. It's just like every time he started getting it going in Wisconsin, he suffered a major freak injury. And then the year before last, his swing was an absolute discombobulated mess. And then he got injured a little bit again in 2025, and I also wonder about the confidence at this point. Like, he's not really hitting anything with any impact, with any type of consistency. This is absolutely a make or break year for him. If he wants to reclaim any bit of that prospect pedigree, there's those young guns coming right up that can easily, they don't have any of that injury history, and they're all extremely talented. So sadly, when I look at Eric Brown Jr., even though I like the athlete and believe there's something there, I do ultimately see it being a change of scenery candidate. But hopefully he proves us wrong. And to your point about Eduardo, he certainly reclaimed his prospect status. But not much more to say there.
Yeah. we can touch on these others of note quickly here. So we've got Ethan Murray, Darian Miller, Ramon Rodriguez, and Dylan O'Ray. O'Ray, we've talked about a little bit in the first episode, coming off of the IL after missing the whole season. He played in the AFL, showed some good things in the AFL. Still kind of the same questions as we've seen with some other guys in terms of impacting the ball. He's never going to be a big power guy, but can he impact the ball enough to even be passable at the big league level, I think is what the question will be with him. But I would say there's kind of some Brandon Lockridge type qualities to him, which means big time speed, good defender, probably never going to hit for much pop, but he can kind of give you oppo line drives, that type of approach. That's probably like the path I see to maybe being able to find himself a big league role at some point here. It helps that he can play a legitimate second base, gives him some infield and outfield versatility. But I think that's probably what you're looking at for O'Ray. Ramon Rodriguez is a guy we both like quite a bit. He unfortunately had a major injury that ended up costing him the vast majority of the season last year after a pretty solid start. Again, he was hitting the ball really well when he was playing in Double-A. He's one of those guys that when you watch him catch, like he just commands the game well. He calls a good game. He blocks. He can throw. And he seems to kind of have that knack for the big hit. He was showing that even when the numbers weren't great in high A in 2024. He would seem to come up in big spots and come up clutch and get the job done. So he's a guy that I definitely like having in the org. I hope they can continue to find room for him. And like catchers are kind of the one spot where late bloomers come around the most. Guys who maybe put it together when they're like 26, 27. There's a lot that they have to handle in the minor leagues. They have to handle a pitching staff. They have to handle everything that's going on. And then hitting kind of takes a back seat a lot of times. So that's kind of where it comes in, where some of these guys have later breakouts in terms of the offense. Rodriguez isn't super old in terms of the fact that he's been in pro ball for a very, very long time. He was signed as a 16-year-old and he's kind of bounced around to a couple organizations, but he's an interesting guy. Now we'll have to see how he looks coming off injury and everything else, but I like Ramon Rodriguez. I know, Joseph, you're a pretty big fan of him as well, right?
Absolutely. I just think he's professional in everything he does. And it's apparent when you watch him, he's just dialed in, very clean. He's sure in everything. His movements are sure. His decisions are sure. He's just a pro's pro. Like you can see it. He's 27, but man, off the top of my head, I mean, what was it, like 60 at-bats? He was hitting like 360 with over almost like a 950 OPS. I mean, he was playing a key role in that early run, and then he got injured. It was absolutely heartbreaking, knowing his age, an Achilles injury. It was, but as it stands today, that's an injury. Like if it's not a major full tear, he could be back by the beginning of the season. He's a guy to me who trends as a guy that you can see grow into AAA and then be a very dependable call-up guy, a guy that if they know they need a pro's pro to come up and maybe spot fill for an injury issue, I don't think they would have any issues doing that. Like, I think he's that dialed in. And I think even though the numbers didn't back it up in Wisconsin, you could see that there was actually a hitter in there. Like it's got a good swing. And so it was really nice to see that kind of bear out. And he was clutch. And as you know, in the past, I absolutely loved Brian Navarreto, who never had the offensive numbers that Rodriguez was putting up, but was always clutch in clutch moments. That's valuable. So, yeah, I love the fact that he re-signed. I don't know what the contract details are, but I really hope he gets a chance at AAA. I really do. I think that he could really show that he belongs.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree for sure. The last two guys we have here, we've got Darian Miller and Ethan Murray. Murray had a really, really solid season going in Double-A. He got the promotion to Triple-A. Things really hit the skids in Triple-A, and seeing some of the the batted ball data from AAA, I think it's going to be hard for me to ever envision too much from him. He gives me kind of the Freddie Zamora type vibes where like you just don't hit the ball with enough authority. And there were whiff issues once you got to the highest level as well. But he was doing a good job in AA, and he was performing well enough, and he's a solid enough defender at a bunch of spots. So he's not somebody I would rule out as a potential big leaguer down the line, but it's just one that I think is going to be pretty tough unless he starts to show a little bit more at the plate. But he's another guy who just plays the game the right way and does a lot of really good things on the field when he's out there. He helps your team win. Just maybe not enough to do it at the big league level. And then Miller is another guy who had a really solid overall season in terms of results, but a lot of it is carried by walks and hit by pitches. He's basis because he will take his hit by pitches with the best of them as well. And he made some strides defensively this year. I think it's still something that it comes and goes for him. I think we need to see still more steady defense back there, but he is also known to be a very, very good. He works with the pitching staff really well. He's somebody who connects with the pitchers well. There's a lot of like big time leadership qualities that the Brewers and everyone kind of likes about Darian Miller. So there are good things here. There's very the impact in the bat is lacking. It was a 329 slug versus the 381 on base percentage, which again, heavily carried by walks and hit by pitches, which is great. But if you don't show much with the bat, once you get to those highest levels, they're just going to attack you and make you prove that you can get on base using the bat. So he is another one who, you know, when catchers are in this tier, they're interesting enough where like catcher's always a spot where a backup catcher might be needed at any point. Like you said, I always think of like Tyler Nevin getting a random call way at the, or not Tyler Nevin, Nevin Ashley, Nevin Ashley, back in, I think it was 2015, getting like a random call up for the Brewers. And Alex Hall was obviously a very different situation, but there's just situations where catchers get that opportunity and sometimes they can run with it by showing that they belong. And these are the types that I think if they get that chance, you never know. And they're probably going to continue to be in pro ball for a while, and potentially they'll get that chance at some point, whether it's with the Brewers or with somebody else, because they have a lot of really good qualities, even if the overall skill set isn't great. They do a lot of really good things that are really important from a catcher in general. So anything on Murray or Miller that you'd like to add before we move to the pitchers?
Well, the Brewers love Miller. They invite him to spring training, big league spring training every year. And I think they just love his personality and just his affability. And yeah, everything you said there is accurate. And Ethan Murray, man, he's been a perennial favorite of mine. Just that I feel like he's a very good defender and he's versatile there. And the drop off we saw when he went to AAA, that's pretty concerning. He showed great things with the bat that were improvements and were impressive when he was with Biloxi, but absolutely fell off the face of the earth when when it's hitting in the 9-hole, often up in Nashville and just not showing anything. That's a big deal. So he's going to be there to start the season again. He absolutely can't have that happen again. Otherwise, he's going to head to the bench, and that's it's going to be tough to reclaim that role. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, we should revisit. I said we were going to revisit the whole time. We got a couple questions regarding the hitting environment in the Southern League. So J78 Shot asked, how much stock should we put into the Southern League being notoriously pitcher friendly? He mentions that it's the league averages for the slash line are 230, 321, 340, which is a 661 OPS. Assessing players like Adams, Lara, Wilkin, and Pratt, looking at those numbers. In turn, do you also devalue, or should you be devaluing pitchers' strong seasons? He says if you add an extra 10 or 20 to 30 points on batting average and on base percentage and 50 points on slugging for each player, they become much different prospects in terms of evaluating the 2025 season. Does the national scouting community put enough stock into ballpark and league differences? So to answer that last part, I do think that's something that can sometimes be lacking in some of the national publications. I think they're kind of looking at raw numbers as they go through, and sometimes they miss the fact that they were actually doing quite well for the environment they were in, but it doesn't look good if you're comparing it to the rest of minor league baseball. So I do think that can be missed. At the same time, none of those lists are really being based off of stats. They're being based off of talking with scouts, talking with organizations. And I should probably even mention this. Like, I think people think that for Pipeline, like they're talking to the Brewers to get information on Brewers players. They're mostly talking to other organizations to get information on Brewers prospects for their list, because they don't want to go straight to the team that has the prospect. It ends up leading to obviously bias. Like, there's going to be bias involved if you do that. So they try and go more through other organizations. So does personal specific. We are doing the scouting on our own, and this is what we're going to get. But they use sources as well. And like I said, for the same thing for them, they're mostly going through Brewers sources for the Brewers list, because they want to know non-biased sources have. So I just want to clarify that too, because I think sometimes people think that's the case, that teams are pumping up their own prospects or whatever. Like, they might be, but that's not who they're listening to try and make their lists. But in terms of the actual environment, it's crazy. Like, it is as low as you will find at any point. And Peter GB asked, how bad is the hitting in the Southern League, and what do we make of the offensive stats there? Any precedent? I couldn't really find any precedent. I didn't go back super far, but it's a completely different level of hitting environment than pretty much any other league in MILB right now, in all minor league baseball. That said, I think a lot of this stuff is accounted for within weighted runs created plus, and that type of number, anything plus, any plus number that is all league adjusted, I think that's what you want to look at when you're looking at a lot of these things, because that's the environment they're in. That's going against who they're facing, who they are competing against. That's the league. That's the environment. And the main thing with this is a lot of it is just the stadiums are a part of it, but a lot of it is honestly like wind, and the way the wind comes off of the ocean in certain places and things like that are playing a big role in why the environment is how it is. I also think the baseball has changed a few times over the years. So there's a lot of things that play in, but for me, I don't know that it needs to be factored in the sense that like you have to change the numbers, but I think an awareness of it is very important. And that's where I think, like I said, I think maybe sometimes somebody who's only scouting numbers could easily miss it, where they're just looking through like, okay, who had the best OPSs in minor league baseball this year? And you're rarely going to find a Southern League player on there. And that's just because of the environment they're in. They might get missed by those people, but I think the people who are really doing the down and dirty scouting, writing up these reports, I think everyone's pretty aware of it. In fact, most of the time when you read those reports, they make mention of it. It's usually brought up to an extent where they'll be like, yes, he only had a 691 yes, but environment incredibly tough hit. It's not something I think you need to. I might not even be answering the question how you're asking, but it's not something I worry about too much. I think it's just you need to be aware of it, and you need to factor it in. But I don't really know exactly how you do that. I think just comparing it to the league average is the easiest way, and that's usually how I do it. But Joseph, just given what you know about it and maybe how you look at it, is there anything else that you maybe a different way that you factor it in that I'm not really seeing or catching or maybe mentioning here?
No, I think I mean, once you know the baseline of what the average is producing in any league, you know, that's one thing. But really, the players play, man. When you're watching the games, the players that pop are still the players that pop, irrespective of any of the greater numbers, because you can always look under the hood of any player nowadays, right? And the plus numbers you're speaking to, they carry a lot of weight. But I can remember the first time I saw Michael Harris for the Braves in the center field in the Southern League, I knew instantly that this was a major league player. Like, he moved different. He was more athletic. He was hitting things hard. It just looked like it was too easy. And he got called up straight from Double-A. That type of thing is apparent no matter what league you're watching, right? And Jesus Mate showed it last year in high. And granted, these are outlier, like, supreme talents. But my point is that when you're watching the games and you're seeing the players move and you're seeing how they respond to certain situations, that to me, above and beyond, means more than the other stuff, like, truly. And that's why I believe that Frelick and Mitchell were, they weren't really impressing all that much in Double-A. If you remember, they were kind of just middling and inconsistent, but you could see they were supreme athletes. They had great movement, and it was not surprising in the least when they got promoted. And so I think that the organization knows what they have in their players, and the guys that are on the fringe that aren't considered, like, in these top 20 lists or whatnot, across multiples, those are the guys, really, they have to carve out their niche by exceeding the expectations. So when Eric Brown Jr. is, performing far below that league average, well, that's a concern. Like, that's legitimately a concern, because he's not even hitting the baseline and he has an injury history, right? And so, however, when you watch a Lara move and you see how his approach is, that's a major league player. You can just see it. You know it. Luke Adams, same thing. You see it when he hits it hard. He hits it hard. Brock Wilken, Rockets, both of them were far and above the league average OPS. But at that point, it's like, well, yeah, that's what we expect these guys to do when they're their best. So I think that conversation gets overstated, and I think a lot of that gets lost in that shuffle as well, is that, you're having guys being pushed early from high A. They're in these new environments. They're facing older pitchers. You might have some indie guys coming in that are in their mid-20s that are trying to just discover them, and then, numbers fall down. And then, of course, you have Gulfstream stuff. Yes, all that's real, but at the end of the day, the players show themselves. That's just how I feel about it. It's how I've always felt about it. Like, I look at all those numbers. I look at the WRC Plus. I look at all of those things. I'm still a little antiquated in that I still use OPS because I like what that's telling me as a baseline. But I watch the guys, and I form all of my opinions on how they play, period, end of story. And so, maybe that's antiquated in of itself. Maybe that's why I'm an old school scout at heart. I don't know. But yeah, so my overarching end statement to that is, yes, it means something other than the only thing it means is that is that league's average. But players go on runs, they have streaks, and the organizations know what they have in their players because they're with them all year long. And so we can get caught up in it, but I don't think it really matters at the end of the day because the teams know.
Yeah, and even if you like you said, visual scouting is a huge part of what I do as well, but I think the more actual data you can get your hands on in terms of like actual batted ball data, I think that's where you're going to get a lot more information than looking at a stat line ever. If you're looking at numbers, and it's not easy to get your hands on, so I'm not saying like everyone has access to it or it's always easy to get, but that's what teams are putting their value in. They're not looking at the overall production most of the time. They're looking at what the process is. Does he have good swing decisions? Is he hitting the ball well? He could be lining out to center 15 at-bats in a row, and he's hitting 0 in that stretch. And in reality, the team is seeing a great process, a guy who's smoking the ball, a guy who's got a bunch of good things going for him at the plate, but numbers-wise, it doesn't look good. So I think most teams and organizations are factoring all that in already. So the fact that, the ballparks or the weather environment might be playing a role in how the ball's flying or certain things like that, I think that usually gets sorted through even by teams for sure, but then even by these national medias that you're talking about. Most of them have a lot of access to this stuff too. And it's part of the reason they're talking to as many teams as well to get more data and to be able to make those decisions based off of a little bit more under the hood stuff, I guess is the best way to put it. But hopefully that answered the question. I think we kind of roundabout got to it in a way, but that can take us into the pitcher portion here. So I broke these down a little bit differently than I had on previous ones because there's an interesting group that we didn't really have in the other teams that we've gone through so far, and I labeled it possible starters or leverage relievers. And we'll get to those guys second. I'm going to start with the guys who I view as more pretty good chance that they have a real chance to start moving forward. So we talked about Jaron DeBerry a little bit last time, but we said we were going to save him for this podcast. And this is a personal favorite of mine. This is a guy that I had called out as like, I want the Brewers to draft this guy. I think he fits exactly how the Brewers operate as a pitching development staff. He got off to a solid start in low A this year. He moved to high A. The overall numbers did not look good. And this kind of comes back to the point that I was just talking about with hitters mostly, but I would bet that a lot of the underlying stuff looked quite good for him in high A. I watched a lot of those starts. He had like a 5.5 ERA, but he was not pitching at a 5.5 ERA level. The stuff looked good. He was in the zone a decent amount. He was getting some strikeouts. He's getting some whiffs. There was pretty bad luck involved. Everything was kind of going against him. And I think they also were having him go a little bit more fastball heavy because they wanted to work on the cutter and the two seam more than he showed in Double A, where he did get to go a little bit more to his bread and butter, which is his breaking balls and the improved changeup that he has this year too. So DeBerry for me is still somebody that I just really, really like. I love the pitch shapes. I like the fact that he's already made a little bit of a velo jump in pro ball. He is as skinny as they get for somebody who's gone all the way through college and is already in pro ball. I'm hoping he can add a little bit more mass and a little bit more velo. If he can get into that 93 to 95 range with consistency, I think he's a big league starter, and I think he's a pretty solid one. There's just so much to like about the repertoire across the board. He's got multiple breaking balls. He's got all three fastballs. He's got the changeup. It all spins, big time spin. I know Baseball America wrote him up as a guy to watch next year because of how a lot of the metrics looked on his pitches. He's just a really, really a guy that I'm excited about to watch more. I would imagine in Double A again next year, but probably for most of the season. I just want to see how he can pick up from where he left off because the results were good and the process was good and the strikeouts were there and the whiff was there. So what did you see from DeBerry? We didn't talk about him really at all yet. So really throughout the season, if you'd like to talk about all of it.
Yeah, he's just he's a versatile, wiry guy. It's really good spin. Like that's the thing that pops the most. Like he can really spin it in there, and he gets a good swoop and good dip. Honestly, when he got to Double A, what impressed me the most was his fastball, which is odd. I wasn't expecting that. I just liked how it approached the plate. Like he could keep it low. He found ways to sneak up, backdoor it. His Double A performance. Gosh, I feel like I say this about too many players, but it was one of the more exciting storylines of the season. Like it just was. Like because the Shuckers were down and hurting in the pitching. DeBerry just came in, and from game one, I think game one, I want to say he pitched 5 or 6 innings, like right off the bat. But yeah, he was doing that consistently, and he just never looked overmatched. He never looked out of place. He looked like he was controlling the outing. He was dictating to hitters as opposed to the other way around, which was extremely impressive. His frame is such that I think that his frame is wiry enough and gangly enough. Like he's not a pitcher that I see having problems pitching a lot of innings. Like he's got that kind of build. He doesn't throw overpowering stuff, so it's not going to be an issue there. But everything he throws is pretty much right around edges. He's got good slider too. He can get some swings and misses on it. He's just a very underrated upside arm in the system. I still feel like that today. Like I still feel like even with that amazing second half he had with Biloxi, I still feel like he's unheralded. And he belongs up here with Hardin and Crow, who were two of the most impressive pitchers in the entire system. That tells you anything you need to know. But yeah, it was interesting. Like when he got called up from Wisconsin, you could see a lot of people on the forum like, huh? Like they didn't quite understand it. And I think at that time I was like, I think when these things happen, we have to, again, the organization knows what's going on under the hood. So they know what they're working with. They don't care about a high ERA. ERA, especially in high A for a talent, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. He wasn't showing any of the flaws that we were seeing from a guy like Burchard, who also has electric stuff, but really he was still working on control. Jaron wasn't having those issues. He was getting some pretty unlucky batted ball stuff going on there. And so it's always, I don't know, it's always affirming, like yourself, like when you're a prospect head, when you fall in love with certain players and you're like, God, they should be performing better. And then they go up a level and they just shut it down. It's such a great experience as a fan and someone who watches almost all the games. DeBerry was that to a T last year. It was awesome. And I knew that was one of your favorite guys going into that draft. And I think I was like texting you during those outings, like, hey, your guy's lighting it up.
Oh yeah. No, he was he signed for 25,000 too. I was pumped about that pick. That was one of my favorite picks they've made, and they've made a lot of picks that I've liked. So, but Coleman Crow, you mentioned, he was up here. DeBerry was up there with Crow and Tyson Hardin, and you mentioned DeBerry being one of your favorite storylines. I like Crow coming off his injury. We didn't know exactly what we were going to see. We had not seen him pitch really in a Brewers uniform outside of the AFL in 2024. And that was right after his injury, right after Tommy John coming off of it. And it didn't look great. It was not very good. The stuff wasn't great. He was not really getting much swing and miss or much whiff in the AFL. That changed in a big time way when he started pitching in AA. He had a 32% whiff rate overall, which is an absurd number against the pitcher. His strikeout rate was also 32%. He was striking out over 11.5 per nine. His ERA was 3.24, while his FIP was 2.35. He was only walking batters at a 2.16 per nine and a 6% clip. So like everything looked great. He goes to AAA. The stuff looks really good. He struck out a bunch of guys in his first start. His next start did not go well, and apparently he got injured to some capacity, obviously, during that game. Doesn't sound like it's anything that's going to be an issue moving forward for him, but he got hurt. Did he get hurt on a plane or something after that game? Did he have a side injury or something after getting off?
It was a side injury.
There was something weird, if I remember right. Okay. There was something weird about it, I remember, but okay. But it's not something that'll carry into this season. Now, he did only throw 50 innings. He's coming off of missing basically 2 full seasons with injury. The question mark for him is health. The stuff's going to play. He's a big league arm. He will pitch in the big leagues in 2026 if he's healthy. He's on the 40-man. They had to add him to keep him from minor league free agency. He's part of the Brewers' plans. If he can stay healthy, he's going to pitch for the Brewers next year. The spin on the curveball is absurd, but like the amount of break he gets on the breaking balls it's a disgusting pitch. It's the best breaking ball in the Brewers system, and I don't think it's even all that close. And there are some good ones, but it stands out, and it's a plus pitch on its own. And the stuff plays off of each other well. He was adding a changeup and a decent looking one during his time in AA as well. So there's a lot to like about Coleman Crow. It's not big velo, but everything else is big in terms of the shapes and the movement, and he has solid command to go along with it. He's one to watch, I would imagine, in 2026, and we'll probably see him in Nashville to start the year. But Joseph, anything you'll be looking for specifically other than, the health part of it?
Man, what's funny about Crow's AFL stint is I watched his first outing off in the AFL. You can stream, and he looked awesome. I was like, okay, yes. And then it just turned into a quagmire of an AFL experience. But I knew from that first outing, I was like, okay, he's got something. It's real. So I felt, mildly validated. Not that that's why I watch, but he's, I said it in season. He reminds me the way he competes on the mound and his mound presence. He reminds me of Logan Henderson. And I see them both as guys who could and Logan already did it, but he's a guy who, when he gets on a big league mound, he's going to surprise a lot of people. and he's going to shut down the opponent, and people are going to. His curveball is absurd. Like that thing, like it like breaks, it swoops, it dips. You get swords like you wouldn't believe. It is a filthy pitch. I would like to see him get just a little more ride on the fastball. If he can get just a little more ride, his secondaries off that curveball, he's going to be a complete package. Like he just is. And health it's the key. Absolutely key. He's a smaller guy. He's had some significant, well, this last one wasn't significant. I think the Brewers were being ultra conservative there, rightfully so. Shut it down. And thank God they 40-manned him. I was mildly concerned. I didn't think they wouldn't, but we could just put that in the rearview mirror. So.
Yeah, no, we're happy to see him stick around, and I'm very excited to see what he does in 2026. Tyson Hardin, I mean, like I said, we keep saying this for people, but that story is nuts. Like this is a guy who was a 2-pitch reliever at Mississippi State, walking only in 2023, walking like 7 per 9 at Mississippi State. He had a better season his senior year, and the Brewers draft him obviously in the day 3 portion of the draft, taking him in the 12th round. And, he had his short debut, 4 innings or whatever in low A. We talked about him a lot more in the high A episode, so we won't go super in depth on him here, but what he showed in high A was incredible because it was 62 strikeouts to 9 walks. It was a 2.34 ERA. And then it was like, okay, he's getting pushed to Double A. This will be a good test for him. And in 38 innings, the strikeouts weren't quite there at the same level. He wasn't able to generate as many strikeouts, but we're still talking about a 34-8 strikeout to walk ratio in Double A, which is a really, really solid ratio. And on the whole, for the whole season, it was 96-17, which is fantastic. This is a guy who had control issues as a 2-pitch reliever, and he is now a 4, maybe 5-pitch starter who has all the traits to be a really, really good starter. The fastball shape, you mentioned Crow kind of lacking some of that ride. That is not the case with Hardin. Hardin is getting ride, and he is getting it from a low slot with a bunch, like the vertical approach angle on his pitch is elite. It is a really, really good pitch at the top of the zone. And he's got the cutter, he's got the slider, he's got a changeup that was coming around a little bit. He threw more 2-seams in college than he did 4-seams, so the 2-seam isn't a bad pitch, but I think he commands the 4-seam better, which might have been part of the reason he worked out, or part of the reason he threw so many more strikes in pro ball than he did in college. But we also have, like, in shorter stints, we've seen him up to 98. He touched 99 in college. As a starter, he was more like 93 to 95. You'd see some 96. I think we saw a couple 97s early in the year in Appleton. But he also went from a tiny inning sample in college to he ended up throwing 96 innings in his first pro season. Like that's a big jump. And he ended up kind of getting shut down more for like arm fatigue at the end of the year, more than any actual injury. But this was just an incredible. He's only behind Sin for me in terms of stuff and just what he could be if he reaches a ceiling. I heard a comp from somebody that knows a lot of stuff that he heard from some people within the industry that there's like Jacob deGrom qualities here. Now the velo would need to get bumped up more consistently, but a lot of what is there and the athleticism that he brings to the mound and everything else, like they were like, there's deGrom type qualities here. And you can see it when you watch him, like the movement and the athleticism, it's on there, it's on display. But yeah, I'm not expecting Jacob deGrom. Don't ever expect that from anyone. You will get disappointed. But he's a very fun guy to watch and a guy who he could force his way into Milwaukee next year, maybe in a relief role at first, kind of following along with like the Corbin Burns or the Brandon Woodruff, just with how good the stuff is. I could see him forcing his way up to Milwaukee at some point next year. But 2027, if there's a season, I would imagine that's probably the ETA for him, but a really, really fun arm as well. What did you see from him?
I mean, I've talked about it before. I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, and you touched on it. The remarkable story. It's surreal. I mean, I was not expecting that season, and it was utterly unreal. It just was. It was like, what is going on here? If you just consider this group here of Tyson Hardin, Coleman Crowe, DeBerry, and then we don't have them in here because we touched on them last, and you toss in a Bishop Letson, and then you add this category we're going to get into below with Keener, Witrowski, and Hunt. I mean, man, that is some really, really solid pitching depth. That's right there. This is that whole thing about why, I'm not going to go into this with any kind of depth, but why they traded Freddie Peralta. Well, we all know the year was the year, and then you're just going to get a comp pick or something, yada yada. But they have an immense pool of starters here with high upside potential that they can now let it see how does it play out, who stays healthy, who reaches those next levels. And also, please don't go start saying that we have the next Jacob deGrom. That's not what's going on here. But he does. He's extremely athletic. Harden's extremely athletic. He's built. He's strong. He's fearless. He's got a developing, burgeoning pitch mix that if you start seeing a guy like Hardin who comes in, like, say, off of this offseason and suddenly he's sitting 97, 98, I mean, that's kind of a big deal. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a guy who's flashed it in shorter stints, just getting used to a starter workload. Sometimes the velo will pump back up a little bit more consistently once he gets used to, because to an extent he probably feels like he has to save some in the tank compared to what he did as a reliever. But once you get used to it and you build up the stamina, if that velo's in there, it could be even more along the lines of like Brandon Woodruff, where he reaches back for it when he needs it, pre-injury Brandon Woodruff, I should say. But he reaches back and all of a sudden you see a 99 mixed in there once in a while, and then he sits more 96-ish, but you'll see that 98, 99 when he needs it. I think he's capable of doing stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to follow. But moving into that other tier, like you mentioned before, with the possible starters, maybe leverage relievers. So we've got Tate Keener, Brett Witrowski, and Casey Hunt in this one. Keener is one of the guys that I just think never quite got the love that he deserved for what he did in Double-A last year, and then also getting a promotion to Triple-A. I mean, it didn't go crazy well in Triple-A, but the stuff is there. And in my eyes, what I've said for a while now was like, that's a big league arm. Like, he's a big leaguer in some capacity. Maybe it's a reliever, decent chance it is, but this is a funky left-handed slot with a fastball that plays pretty well at the top of the zone because he can get decent enough carry on it from a lower slot. He's got the sinker, but also the four seam. And then he has a slider. He added more of a true curveball that takes more off of it. So the slider's thrown in like that 83 to 84 range. The curveball's thrown in like the upper 70s. He's got the changeup that he throws in the mid 80s. That was a really good pitch for him against righties this season. But it all comes from that funky slot. He did it as a starter, so he showed he could hold his velo well late in the starts. Even he was hitting 96. You'd see a couple 97s within there. Mostly sat more in like the 93, 95 range, but you'd see some pretty nice velo from a weird lefty slot. Like, to me, it's just somebody that screams he's a big leaguer. I don't know what it ends up being. My guess would be he's more likely to end up in relief, but I won't rule out starting because he's been starting all the way through the minors. He's shown that he can hold his stuff late in the games. That's a fun arm. Like, Keener's just a fun arm that has interesting qualities that normally is relief only, but again, he was holding it late in the starts. What did you see from Tate Keener this year when you were watching him?
Yeah, I agree on your overarching point there that he doesn't get the love he deserves. Really interesting release point. his delivery is one of his plus qualities. It creates a little deception there. I think what was encouraging about 2025 more than anything was he was more accurate. When he was in high A with Wisconsin, he would struggle finding the zone. And he started out like gangbusters and then he kind of fell off. But man, he's unafraid and capable of going to the top of the zone because he has some velo there, those mid 90s, touches 97. But that slot, it has very good deceptive ride. Like it just elevates. It's nice. When he's really on, he gets that swooping breaker in there that can just get swing and miss all day long with lefties. That's when he's really on. Yeah, I think he could be a starter in there. I tend to lean middle relief or kind of a utility reliever, but he has been a starter his entire tenure as a Brewer, and he's never really had prolonged stretches of ineffectiveness. And I think last year's season was the most important, the fact that he got to AAA. I didn't necessarily care as much how it went there. I thought there might be a feeling out period. We saw that with Childers as well. Definitely saw it with Fitzpatrick. He has better stuff than both in terms of like more tools to work with. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see which version we get. Did he add another wrinkle in the offseason? Did he dial in even more control? Does he have more confidence? Because if he has more confidence, and I think that was part of the factor there. Like he looked a little like the first thing I noticed when he got up to the International League was like, oh, he looks really young. He looks kind of like a young guy up there. And I was like, oh, okay, he needs to add some mass, And so I'm really curious to see how this offseason treated him. He's got a lot of talent. I think that's the main thing that people should know here is that this isn't like just a guy at all. Like he's got some wicked stuff. When it's on, it's pretty wicked. So this is a fun season. And pay attention to Tate Keener. That's the end. Pay attention to him.
Yep. Agreed. Brett Wachowski, a little bit different story. So the stuff is one of those guys that if you see a radar gun, you really are going to be excited about what you're seeing on the mound. He had pretty good overall results this year. He did a good job. He had a 3.44 ERA in Double-A. His FIP was 3.99, which we'll get to in a second because there's reasons for that, and the big one being that he only struck out 16.7% of batters that he faced, and that's a pretty low number for a guy who can get into the upper 90s and sits pretty close to 96, 97. Especially this year, you saw a lot more of that throughout the season. The year prior, when he got up to Double-A, you kind of saw the velo kind of fall back down into the 93, 94 range more consistently. It was good to see the velo kind of hold for the majority of the season this year when he was healthy. But there is a lack of swing and miss that is hard to fathom for a guy who has good breaking balls and throws hard. The thing that keeps standing out to me is I just don't know that there's a fastball shape there that actually plays very well. And that's probably the biggest concern for me is that I think he's kind of throwing three fastballs. Some of the fastballs seem to have a little bit of run. There's very little carry involved on it, and I think the fastball just gets hit quite a bit for him. If they can find some way to maybe it's going full time, like, hey, we're going to make this a cutter, kind of the Corbin Burns route of like, let's try and make this a cutter full time. Maybe it is, he ends up in the bullpen where he can actually touch triple digits in short stints, and you play off of the breaking balls and you try and make the fastball like the off speed pitch. It's just a ton of arm talent though, and that's really what it is right now. Can we get some more swing and miss out of it is the question for me. I saw a lot of other improvement this year. He was in the zone a good amount. The velo held a lot more this year. It's just, can we generate swing and miss? So, Joseph, is there anything you saw that maybe points to something you're hoping he can maybe take a step in to get some swing and miss, or anything you just saw from him this year in general?
Well, if you remember when the season ended, I had said that I really hope that he has an off-season fastball evolution like Childers did in the AFL.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. A guy like he has moments where he's utterly electric, but they're literally only moments. And so when I watch Wichrowski, I just feel like there's way too much talent in that bag to get those middling results. And someone might say, well, 3.4, whatever ERA he had in the Southern League. Well, the 3.99 FIP doesn't lie to me. Like to me, it is more of a 4 FIP kind of guy. The way he's been executing, and he's just still not polished. And so I see a 98 mile an hour fastball, but I don't really see a 98 mile per hour fastball. I see a very hittable pitch, and it gets hit.
Yeah.
But man, he's got tools for days. This is a guy, Wichrowski to me is a huge wild card. If he could find the shape that you're speaking to, and he could find just a little more deception in his stuff, he's like a what? I think if that happens, to me, his floor becomes a 3 starter at the major league level. But that's a huge if that happens. To date, I think your point about him being like, a reliever who maybe comes in for a 1 inning stint, that's more realistic. But it's in there. Like when you watch him pitch, I feel like the main experience I have with Wichrowski is like, what? There's more. What just there should have been more there. Like he comes out an outing, he pitches 5-6 innings, he had 2 strikeouts. And I was like, wait, how did that happen? You know what I mean? It's just a strange experience. It's a little bit of a tilt-a-whirl.
Yes. Yeah, it is. He's one of the more frustrating guys for me to watch just because that talent is so evident, but he's just not quite put it together. And that's part of the growth. I mean, this is a day 3 college pick. That was a part-time reliever, kind of a spot starter for Bryant University in college. So it's not like this should have been a high expectations guy, but he ended up putting some on himself when he started throwing 100 miles per hour in spring training, his first spring. So it's probably a bit unfair, some of the expectations that were laid on him very quickly, but it is somebody that, like, if he can figure out something to do with the fastball shape, there is a ton there. And if not, it probably settles into maybe being like a fringe reliever in the big leagues. Casey Hunt is a guy that we talked about a lot last year. He had a fantastic initial, other than a very short stint in the complex league in 2023. His first real season was 2024 as an undrafted free agent, and he was unbelievable. He was co-pitcher of the year, had a fantastic season for the Brewers. 2025 was a bit of a step back, and not to be a huge shock, really. I mean, to repeat the success he had while he climbed multiple levels in 2024 was going to be tough to do, but it was an ERA of 4.45. Now his FIP was 3.9, and kind of like Wichrowski, how I viewed Wichrowski's FIP to be accurate. I would do the same with Hunt. Like, I think Hunt pitched better than his ERA would indicate, but there were things that took some steps back. His velo was down a little bit more consistently. We saw him a lot of like sitting 93 in AA, and throughout his 2024 season, we saw a lot of like 90, 91, maybe getting up to 93 in some starts, or a lot of starts in 2025. So the velo wasn't quite holding as well. And that did matter because it's a fine fastball shape. It's better than Wichrowski's, but it's not a special one. So the more you take off of it and velo wise, the more hittable it does become. The breaking stuff was still really good. And I do want to say, I think there was an element of the Brewers wanting to work on things that they thought were going to catch him when he got to AAA or potentially in the big leagues. And the main one being they wanted the changeup to become a better pitch. And there was a heavy focus on, he threw a lot of changeups this year, and it felt like it was pointed. It felt like it was something that they purposely were having him do. And it, to his credit and to their credit, if that was the plan, I thought he made really big strides in the changeup department. I thought it was a pitch that came a really long way from where it was in 2024. But it did make me wonder if there was an element of, maybe he's just not using the best pitch mix right now because it's for development purposes, and that's causing some of the lack of swing and miss from what he showed in 2024. But I do think the drop in velo and some of the other stuff played a role too. The breaking stuff is just gross though. I mean, the curveball's really, really good. It's not Coleman Crow level, but it's really not super far behind. I actually meant the slider. The slider is his best one, but I like the curveball as well. It's just a fun mix of breaking balls. Now, at this point, I wonder how likely starting is for him going, especially like at the highest level. But I do think the breaking ball mix is something that could play in a relief role, in a middle relief role, maybe even a little bit higher if the velo, say in shorter stints, he's like 95, which he's touched before. He's gotten up into the mid 90s at times. If he could be there in one inning stints instead of where he is as a starter, then maybe leverage comes into play because of how well he spins the ball and how good the breaking balls are and the strides the changeup made. But it was a bit of a step back. I think maybe I think a lot of people probably pushed him too far up lists after one season in pro ball. But at the same time, I think a lot of people have kind of given up on him after his second, and I think that's also incorrect. I think both were probably overreactions, and the reality is that he's kind of somewhere in the middle of where everyone's kind of viewed him these last 2 years. Is that kind of how you'd view it too?
Yeah. I would say also, like, it felt like he was fighting himself a lot of the season. Like, he never really was able to string. And I think that's your point where it's somewhere in between. I think you're accurate there. I don't think he's a 91 mile per hour pitcher. Like, he's got more in the tank. One of the things laughing about it, at the end of last off season, he had posted a clip of him with a knuckler. And I was so looking forward to him breaking that out in the game. Never saw it. Bummer for me. But he's the kind of guy who has that type of off-speed arsenal where he could just suddenly have a knuckle like a splitter. You'd be like, huh? He's got like 5-6 pitches. But he just never. The thing that stood out to me was that he just went through long stretches where he was fighting himself. His balls were going in the dirt. He couldn't get the zone. It just felt like a season where he was a little bit disheveled throughout. And so maybe there was a development plan in place that we didn't know. That's always a possibility, especially when you have a guy who was co-pitcher of the year. But yeah, it'll be really interesting because, Yoho, we'll get into that in our next episode, but he also had his struggles last year as well. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah. If for a realistic shot at like an end of a rotation starter, he absolutely has to get that velo sitting 94, 95. Like, there's no question. Like, he doesn't really have an option. He can't go up to that level with his stuff and be throwing 90s. He doesn't have Woodruff's savvy or kit. He's gonna. So
Right.
I think realistically, what you were speaking to there is like probably a relief guy who maybe 1 to 3 inning. But if last year was just a blip, and he's actually a mid 90s guy who actually has a dialed in mix, well, maybe we're wrong. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. We are coming up to basically just all, but YouTube to 2 different tiers, one of them being big stuff and possible leverage relievers, and then the other one kind of being that finesse reliever type. You could probably debate one of these names, whether it should be in one or the other, but in the big stuff category, I have Will Childers. Already mentioned him a little bit. Mark Manfredi, Brian Fitzpatrick, and Tyler Bryant. And then in the finesse category, we have Nick Merkel, Caleb Bowman, and Chase Costello. So, Joseph, among those guys, we actually got a question from BR Rose now asking who has the highest floor and ceiling between Caleb Bowman, Tyler Bryant, and Nick Merkel. So between those 3, highest floor and highest ceiling for you?
Ooh, good question. That's a fun one. I think the ceiling is pretty blatantly Tyler Bryant. I mean, when Tyler Bryant is on, I mean, you're talking about a bulldog with his hair on fire. That guy can just absolutely bring it. Man, and we've had good stretches where Tyler Bryant was on, and I thought he was the most impressive reliever in the entire system. He's that good when he's on. Um, he's got like just a fiercely aggressive mentality on the mound. Like he wants to hit you. Like it's like you question whether he's going to throw the pitch or charge you and punch you. It's like that type of like demeanor. Um, got a really compact, violent delivery. He's got a wicked slider and can absolutely rip like meaningful 95. He touches like I think he touched 98. He typically like sits 95, 97, mainly 95, 96, but he throws it with freaking fire and it rides, and he's a strikeout king when he's on. Like he's just unhittable. So to me, Tyler Bryant has the highest ceiling because he has legitimate closer stuff, setup closer stuff. Like it's there.
Mm-hmm.
His injury was a super bummer because I felt like he was just starting to showcase that. And it was right after, if I remember correctly, it was right around the time Yeager got called up, and I was like, "Oh yes, Tyler's going to be the closer. We get to see it." And then boom, injured. Total bummer.
Yeah.
Highest floor between Merkel and Bowman. I think just because of Merkel's pitch mix, I give him the higher floor.
Yep.
Although, if I'm being conservative, I know Caleb Bowman tends to be the more consistent, but Merkel's just got better stuff. That's not to downplay. Caleb Bowman had a very good bounce back season, but he's kind of just a two pitch guy. He's a little more compact. Merkel's got huge size, good breaking ball stuff. He's got a good pitch mix where you could see him, eating up a 2 to 3 innings for you in a needed scenario, and he's done that. I would say that Merkel probably has the higher floor in that regard because I see a future where Nick is actually sneaking his way as a call up. I don't necessarily see that with Caleb, even though he's filled a great role the last couple of years for Biloxi, and he's been healthy for the most part.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. Bryant is a guy that I think the stuff is up there with any relief prospect in the org, uh, bar none. Like it is really impressive stuff. He can get. I've actually, yeah, we've seen some 98 for sure. And it's a good shape fastball too, and it's an aggressive delivery like you talked about. It's everything about it is just aggressive. The way he goes after it. The breaking balls are both sharp. They're thrown hard, different shapes, and like there's a lot to like in that profile. Now the injury, as you mentioned, that's tough. That is going to be a difficult one for him to. We don't know the timeline, I guess, on it for sure. It didn't look very good in the moment. I guess maybe we've gotten an update that I'm forgetting about, but it didn't look great in the moment. So hopefully we'll be seeing him throughout 2026. I'm not exactly sure on the timeline there, but easily the highest ceiling for me. And then, yeah, floor-wise, I definitely agree with Merkel. I think that's a guy with, as you mentioned, it's like a 5-pitch, maybe 6-pitch mix out of the bullpen. The 3 fastballs all play well off each other. He can kind of mix all his other off speed off of each fastball. It's a good mix that should tunnel really well together, but it has been a little inconsistent. The other part with Merkel is that he's got 7 feet of extension, so the ball hits on you a little bit faster than even the velo readings would tell you. I am a fan of his. I think there's a lot to like, and like you said, if he gets called up at some point, I think he'd be someone who could hold his own just with all the different options that he could throw at you. I even think back to a major league spring training game that was on TV where he struck out Stephen Kwan with a cutter, not a guy that strikes out much. So like you could see that even a big league hitter was kind of, Kwan even gave him like a little bit of like a nod, like, ooh, okay, that was a pretty good pitch. So there's some stuff there with Merkel, and I think there's a lot of there's a pretty high floor there just given the pitch mix, like you said. So I definitely like him. We can touch on the other 4 here. So we had Will Childers, Mark Manfredi, Brian Fitzpatrick, and then Chase Costello. So Costello also got hurt in 2025, but a guy who kind of like the off-brand Craig Yoho type, like the changeup's a good pitch, and it's bordering on like the airbender type of pitch, the way he throws it. And the velo at times will jump up and then you'll see it lower. It's kind of inconsistent, but you'll see it into the mid 90s and a little bit higher at times with him. There's interesting stuff with Costello. I like Costello. He's just the results weren't great last year and that he was hurt. We'll have to kind of see where he's at when he comes back, but I do like him. I know he's a favorite of yours as well. And then, man, Freddie had a really rough AFL in 2024, came back and had a solid season. The walks are still too high. He's going to have to clean those up. But the velo has jumped quite a bit from where it was when he first got into pro ball. We were seeing some 97s this year. He was basically sitting 95 and above every time I saw him. There's a pretty decent looking changeup. He's got kind of like there's like a hybrid Brent Suter, Josh Hader delivery in there, kind of, if you watch him. Like he's kind of mixing a little bit of both of them. He's a fun arm. He's just somebody that I need to see more strikes out of him. Fitzpatrick is another guy who he got the chance to go to AAA. He was having a great season in AA. Struggled in his first game really badly in AAA, and then after that settled in pretty decently and was not bad by any means the rest of the time there. But the overall numbers don't look good in the small sample because of that first game where I believe he gave up 6 earned runs in less than an inning. So Fitzpatrick's a guy that we got some data on because he went to AAA. I like the changeup shape that he has. I like they called every breaking ball he threw a slider. I think he's got like a short slider and then a bigger, maybe a sweeper type. And then he also gets into the mid 90s with pretty decent extension from a big 6'7" lefty frame. He's a fun one. And then you have Childers, the last one, who velo wise, it's pretty good. Like the stuff looks pretty good, but he just got crushed when he got to AAA after having a really good stint in AA. Like the ball was just getting smoked. If you do look at the numbers though, like on the stuff, it's all pretty good. Like there's a 4-seam. They call it a cutter. They tag it as a cutter. I think it's more of like a hard slider and a curveball. All of them are very interesting pitches on their own, but the command was not good in AAA. It was, if it was a strike, it was very hittable, and it wasn't a strike often enough. So anything you'd like to add on those 4 before we wrap it up here?
I thought Manfredi really brought himself back to a place where you can dream on him. The control, as you spoke to, is absolutely still an issue. He'll have these random outings where he just can't find it at all. And that's obviously troublesome. And, you know, it's the development path, so it's not worrying per se. But, man, he continues to have the closest thing to our beloved Raptor on the mound that we've seen since Suter was a Brewer, and he's got more velo. And he just has really good stuff in there where you can see, like, oh, man, if he could put that together, he could be like a dark horse 7th inning guy, 8th inning even. I mean, he just has that there. It's just, it still hasn't fully come together, but I thought his season as a whole was night and day better than the meltdowns he was having in 2024 and then that terrible AFL experience. So that was highly encouraging. Fitzpatrick just absolutely came into the season in shape like he'd never had looked before. Like he was svelte, he was trim, he looked strong. I was excited that he got the opportunity. That first outing was a really unfortunate one, too. I think he had runners on base and then like a really weak hit, and then it just totally fell apart. It was a real bummer. But then he really kind of showed that he could find a niche where he belongs there, and that's really encouraging. His velo bumped a little bit this year, too, if I remember. And yeah, to your point, that Childers experience reminded me that Childers kind of meltdown in AAA. It reminded me of Will Childers' first show at Low A. Like it was like, Will, what is going on? It wasn't even the same pitcher. So I kind of just threw it out the window. I was like, okay, whatever. Let's see what we have in 2026 because his shapes are great. He's got good ride on that fastball. None of that. It was cognitive dissonance. It said, what's going on here? So I think an offseason reset's huge, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. That is all we have for this one. So we have one more episode left. It'll be covering the Sounds. Now, the number of Sounds that will be returning to the Sounds next year it's pretty low. So what we're going to do is we'll cover the rest of the questions we've gotten that are kind of pertaining to like the full system as a whole. At the end of that one as well, we'll cover the sounds, we'll cover the questions specifically about them, but then we'll move to the questions that we haven't been able to really answer, like specifically during any of these episodes, to finish that out. But that will be the end of it for this episode, and then that will be the last one in the series. So hopefully you've been enjoying them. We've got one more coming probably in a couple of weeks, wherever we can fit it into our schedule and try and get it to you. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy, and whenever you're listening to this, because I don't know when it's coming out, I hope you have a great day, and I hope you listen to all of our Brewer Fanatic podcasts, because Jack and I are going to be back full-time pretty soon here. Spring training starts, and we'll be going every week again instead of every other. So keep an eye out for that. It's almost baseball season, and I think we're all very excited about that. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening.